All right, today I want to talk about Samson and the relationship Samson has to Simeon in the Bible. I don't know that anybody's made this connection, but as I'm going through and studying the book of Numbers, I'm fast forwarding, I'm looking at this book of, or the story of Samson, and I'm making some connections that are kind of interesting. So I just wanted to share those with everybody today. So Samson has a few stories here. He has his birth in Judges 13. He's a Danite. He's a Nazarite. There's all this about his hair. We'll find connections to that in the book of Numbers chapter 6 as far as the Nazarite vow. So that kind of ties into some connection there. We have the growing of the hair and the strength. He is the strong man, so we have the group of man in the book of Numbers, right, with Reuben, Simeon, and Gad, with Simeon being the head of that grouping of man in the first census. So there's that kind of connection there. We have this story of Samson pushing the temple apart here when he's in the basement of the temple and they've cut his hair and his hair starts to grow, and again he grows his strength and he pushes the temple apart, pushes the pillar apart there, and brings the house in, and then the 3,000 fall in on him and all this stuff. So there's this story part in I think that's chapter 16. Chapter 14 of Judges talks about the lion that he takes down in the vineyard, encounters a lion in the vineyard. And so again we have the group of the lion in the group of the man in the book of Numbers, so there's some tie-in there. And then there's also the jawbone, the jawbone of the donkey that he uses to slay 1,000 men, right? So there's all of this in the book of Judges between those 4 chapters, that there's a lot of ties in, a lot of connections with what we're seeing in this book. Again, the ensigns, when we're looking at the ensigns, the flags of these tribes, the donkey is associated with Issachar. And so there's a lot of connection with this story of Samson and I think with Simeon. So Samson, if we're going to look at just the name itself, Shin, Mem, Shin, and then it'll be a Vav and then a Nun Safit. So it's going to essentially be the same name as Simeon, except instead of an ayin right here, we have a shin. Now, Samson, Shemeshon, right, that's relative to the sun. Okay, so the root of that word would be the sun for Samson. Now, the root of Simeon would be shin, mem, ayin, and that means sound. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. The tie-in there, the difference would be 230. So if we took the shin off of Samson and converted that shin to an ayin right here, that's going to drop from a value of 300 to 70. So that's a difference of 230. And we've already talked about Simeon's name in Gematria being relative to 233. Because Simeon is 466, so that's 233 times 2. And 233 is our base factor in the first census of the man and the lion groups, right? So we'll look at that here in a minute. Also in this story we have Balaam. So Balaam's name meaning to swallow. Okay, so he's the swallower of the people, the destroyer. He's our bad guy that's not really a bad guy all the time, because he's blessing him when he's supposed to be cursing him, right? And then we have Korah. So Korah is the ones that get swallowed up in the story. Their name meaning bald, so without hair. So we're tying all of these things, these kind of these stories don't really they're kind of enigmatic, just like the story of Samson and the riddle of Samson, right? There's this enigma with these characters, but they all seem to be fitting in together with this idea of the hair and all these things. Now with the Samson and Shemesh, remember there's a tablet of Shemash video that I've got up where we're tying in this idea of the Shemash with the tablet of Shemesh, and all the kind of ties in with that. But you're going to see that there's a lot of focus on the idea of hair and light, right, being associated in that as well. So there's a lot of interesting ties between these two things. And so to show this, I guess what we would want to do is maybe just take a look. I got a couple deals that we can bring up here. And so we've got, so I made some graphics of our breakup of the tribes. Now, again, the first census, we've got the tribes coming out in order here, forming our circular formation around the central tabernacle. And of course, if you've been following along with like the encampment of Israel videos and everything, you'll see a lot of the ties that we found with some of these numbers already. So this is our first census, right? So the first giving of the numbers in chapters 1 and 2 is going to be this configuration. And we're going to see that this group down here of Reuben, Simeon, and Gad, right here I've included Levi's number of 45 in this. But the group without Levi would be 3029. Times 50, this would be 151, 450. And we see that as the 90-degree piece. Basically, this is sort of the thing that gets us started, is finding that 1/4 part that Balaam's trying to get us down the path of seeing. But we'll find that this group right here has a factor of 233 times 650 to get to 151, 450. And then the man group up here, this is going to be 186,400, which is going to be 233 times 800. And so you end up with this difference of 233 times 150 right here. Again, we've reduced these down by a least common multiple of 50 for simplification on the graphic. But this would be sort of like when you're looking at this 90-degree piece, and this is the man group. And again, we have Simeon as sort of the head of the man group here, and we're associating the Danite Samson sort of with Simeon in this instance. But if the man is slaying the lion right here, and inside the lion, when they come back to the lion and look in the carcass, they're finding this piece. So this is the sort of the pattern and sort of the kind of sweet opening within the carcass of the lion right here, that you're finding this segment. And we've already tied, you can go and look at the other videos where we've tied the significance of this piece right here, the 793, which this is 39,650. This is going to be relative to your 23.5 degrees into the golden mean squared times 9, and then we can break up the analemma of the sun with this, and there's all these things that we get to do, and then we also get to tie in that, again, our pi approximation of 732 divided by 233. Again, 732 is going to be 61 times 12, I believe. 61 times 12 divided by 233. That's our pi approximation. Of course, this is the biggest piece, right? This is going to be 61 times 13 right here. So there's a lot of tie-ins, so we can kind of go back and forth in between, our circle. So our 151, 450, we can convert that into a 61, something relative to the ecliptic right here. So we can take our 151, 450, we can multiply that by our 732 over 233 pi, and then we'll end up with 39,650 times 24, I believe, right? So that segment times 24 to get our circle. So we can easily go back and forth in between a lot of these figures, since 233 is a factor in pi, as well as 732, right? So it's very interesting that there's just a lot of interesting things finding with this number, and that is the honey in the lion right here, if this is going to be Samson. Now, another thing with Samson is he's going to end up in the basement, right? All of his hair is going to get, he's going to lose all of his hair. And so what we see, just like we see in in these numbers, right, we're going to find that our second census numbers right here is where we're going to learn that Simeon's number is reduced all the way from 59,300 right here. It's reduced all the way down to 22,200. Okay, and we see that there's all of this growing. All these tribes are growing. Naphtali shrinking, but all the rest of them are growing, and they're all squeezing down against Samson. And we know that Reuben and Zebulun are sea level right here, so they're sort of unstable as water, and they don't move, right? So this is sea level, this doesn't move. Dan over here is the balance, and so everything gets squeezed up against Simeon here, or Samson in our case, and the group of man right here. The man has gotten very weak. Look how weak the man is, very small right here. And at this point right here is when we're going to be told in this is where Korah, right, which means bald or without hair, is getting swallowed up right here. So we think of Samson being all of his hair getting shaved off, and this is where Korah and bald are getting consumed. And then of course we're going to look at there's a number of things that we can look at here with 81.6 plus 81.4 equaling, what is that, 163, all right? So 163 times 50 is going to be 8150. We can look at that. We'll find that here in a minute. But also right here, this is going to be, Levi is 4070, right? So if we elevate this by 50, Levi is going to be 4070. We know that 4070 times the golden mean of 1.618 is going to get us to, this is the eclipse happening, right? This is 6585.39. This is the closest integer that you can multiply by phi to get to your Saros cycle. And so that's all significant. We're finding all of that right here. But as this goes, you hit your limit one way. So we're going to think of this as one solstice. And so now we're going to start growing our way the other way. So we're going to start growing and working our way back down the ladder, down the chain. Before we go, we'll look right here at Issachar. So again, Issachar right here, remember that this is where we found the border between Judah and Issachar was our ecliptic, right? So we found that this was sort of the equinox, and we found this 23.5 degree range. Well, now the idea is like, okay, well, there's a lot that gets into this with Ptolemy's equant, right, and doubling the distance. But at any rate, I've been kind of playing around with the movement of this by 23.5 degrees from equinox to solstice back to equinox. At any rate, we want to look at the distance that we've gone past what would be our equinox from here, and see the changes that all the tribes have made in comparison to where we were at right here when we had the cardinal cross and the ecliptic cross aligned in these points. And we're going to find this would be the projected distance that we've gone one way or the other, whether we're moving this way or the other way. But, if we look at just this one distance, if we were to cut this distance in half and only go half the distance, or this 793, which would be 23.5, we're going to see that this piece of Issachar right here, you could break it up into, if you took 793 off of this number, you would get 233. So essentially you would get 260, you'd get 793 and 233, which would be a pretty interesting find, since 233 is sort of our key to understanding, our first finding our quarter piece and all the significance there. And then 793 would be our ecliptic range. 260, recall, if you look at the video with I want to say it's the astrolabe video, I think, is when we're looking at Ptolemy's model, and recall that in Ptolemy's model, the mean distance to the sun, which would be essentially your 90 degree from the center to your equator, right? We're going to associate that to 90 degrees, so that's going to be 151, 450. And just know that he's got a 60-part mean distance to the sun. That would calculate to 10.3 part distance for your moon deferent. So your moon deferent so what you would do is you would divide 151,450 by 60, multiply it by 10.3 to get your moon deferent distance, and of course that distance is going to be 26,000. So 26,000 happens to be the range. So if we move from here, this is, when we multiply this by 50, this is 13,000, and we go to our other solstice, our other range right here, this is another 13,000. So our total movement over this course is going to be 26,000. That's going to be on par or equivalent to our moon deferent calculation based off of Ptolemy's understanding of sun to moon distance, the mean distance of the sun to the mean distance of the moon. So that's an interesting find right there. And of course, this would be the jawbone of the donkey that's talking to us right here into all these parts. So we have a 260 part, 793 and 233 if we were to extend this over by 793 instead of going this way. But in either situation, we find interesting figures. 650 being the difference in between. Again, that is relative to all of our Adonai figures as well, because all of those numbers are going to be divisible by 65. So all that to say, there's a lot with this story of Samson, I think, that ties into what we see with Simeon right here. And there's a lot of strange things with Simeon's numbers. If we were to look at the step change of what, some of these things are happening as we're going through. So, the step change for Simeon, he's got the greatest amount of change. After him, it's going to be Manasseh. But, Simeon's step change is 3710. And when we think about the transition, there's a transition that I don't have included in here, but if we think about Levi transitioning across Simeon, your step change is going to be different for either side. So your step change for, depending on how you do the transition, there's a situation here which instead of 3710, we have 3710 as his average step change, but on one end it would be 5930. Excuse me. That's not right. Let's move this over here. So on one end it would be 5930. On the other end, it would be a difference of 1110. Excuse me. So if we just look at the difference and say, okay, 3710 minus 11110, and we extend this down. Obviously, we have 2600. We see this pop up again. Again, 2600. When we look at 2600 times 233, that's our total 605,800. So then when we add if we start going the other way with Simeon's number, we're gonna hit on some other numbers in here. So 13700 is a number that we see. 8150 again. This is a number that we just saw with the combination of Reuben West bifurcation and Levi in the second census. So we're going to see that number right there. 2600, 1490, that happens to be your step change of lion. So there's another tie into the lion right here. So your step change for the lion, as you're going through these point to point on these, is 1490. So we're finding ties with, just right here with 3710 to 2600 and 1490. There's something going on, like if this 2600 has something to do with the deferent distance, then the Simeon's movement of negative 3710 and the line of positive 1490, obviously these two together, there's connection there. Interesting there, and that's going to be relative to this 110 figure. So I just wanted to point that out. What the other tie-ins for that, I don't quite know yet, but some of the other step changes that we want to note, chapter 13, we have the spies, and of course it's only Caleb and Joshua of Judah and Ephraim that kind of do their proper duty, and we're going to see that their step change is negative 610. That's the 15th Fibonacci number. The other one is going to be Gilead. So Gilead, recall, is going to be the combination of Reuben, Gad, and then the half tribe of Manasseh. So if we cut the tribe of Manasseh in half, found the half tribe and added them to Reuben and Gad, and then looked at the step change, we're going to find that their step change for Gilead is 233 as well. So we're seeing this number, both of these numbers, by the way, Fibonacci numbers, okay, 13th and 15th Fibonacci number. Like I said, if these are coincidences, they're popping up a lot, okay? Another thing that we want to look at is Gilead, when we look at, I just posted the video, the last video was on the Chronicles chapter 1. Or First Chronicles chapter 12, excuse me. And this is where you have the tribes coming to assist David. And so if you look at that video, obviously we had figured Issachar at 200 or 200 heads being 1,000. So with that 200,000 calculation there, when we looked at the sum total of all of these figures, we ended up with 535. Right, 535,900. So the sum of all of this together is 535,900. And then we know that when we divided this by 233, that was 2,300 again, okay? So 2,300, and of course the difference from our 605,800 standard was 300, right? So 2,600 to 2,300, that was our difference between the two. And of course the difference right there, we found all of that in Judah North and everything else. But one thing that we want to note is that Gilead right here was going to be 120,000. So it tells you that the combination of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh altogether was 120,000. The other half tribe of Manasseh was 18,000 right here. So this is telling you some other information here. And some of the other ties that we had with this to the census was, one thing I didn't touch on in that other video was the 23,000 of Levi. So Levi, remember when we did our calculation, we found 4070 right here. And that started from finding him at 2250 in the first census. And we know that he's growing here and that they're hitting their limit, they're going the other way. And they're working their way all the way back to this other position. They're hitting the Edom limit, and then they're going back the other way. Well, 430 is what you drop to, and we see 430 in other places, 430 years, all of this other stuff. But we see this number pop up. It tells you that their number actually is 23,000 right here. So there's all of this number with the Levite numbers, and you don't know what to make of it because they're talking about different demographics. They're not just talking about males over 20 like all of these numbers are. The Levite numbers you're given are going to be all the males, right, over a month. And so you're told that that figure right here for this census, in which we find 4070 for Levi, we're told that actual number is 23,000. So if we're going to consider 23,000 here, we're going to see that that relates to the 4,600 of Levi in the First Chronicles account. If we multiply this by 5, we're going to find we get 23,000 again. Well, recall that the other breakups, like after you're given the total for Levi in total, then you're given another breakout. So you're told that of this 4,600, there's 3,700 that are of Aaron, and then you're given this 22 chiefs of Zadok, right? So we see that there's a difference of 900 right here between these two. Well, and then you're told 22 chiefs of Zadok. Well, we know that a chief is 37 because Naphtali right here, when we look at Naphtali's total, he was 37, but 1,000 of these were chiefs. So we know that a chief is worth 37. 22 chiefs for Zadok gives you 814. And then so the difference here is 900. So the difference between 814 and 866, or excuse me, 814 and 900 is 86. So when we project this out to these other numbers, you know, it can't be coincidence that you're hitting from this 23,000 number that you're given in the text. We had already found this 4070 number, and when we projected back the other way, we had this 4030 number. So all three of these numbers are found when we look at this Chronicles, First Chronicles discussion on these numbers. Okay, so I mean, we can, you know, we've already kind of confirmed this 430 by seeing that when we project back to this first census, all of these numbers start to line up. So our blessings and curses, all of this stuff in these different subgroups, all of these things start to line up when we get back to this other point. So just a lot of things seem to be confirmed with some of these other things that you're finding in these other parts of the story. I just wanted to pass along sort of the finding with Samson. I think I touched on all of what I wanted to touch on, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll look to see you on the next one. Thanks.